Yeah, evening, 7 o'clock. Hello, Lou. Hello. I love the fact that I can see you and see what you're doing. I'm like, what's going on here then? Right, a little bit of a different class tonight. I am going to give you an introduction into Canvas Workspace. And if you're sitting there going, oh, like I did, I think I can probably take a lot of the fear away, because when I first heard about Canvas Workspace, I was like, nah, not for me, never doing it, don't want to do it, not interested. I absolutely love it, I have to say. And we won't get through everything in it, but there are some things that I want to show you. Now, I've just done the SDX class, where we went into quite a lot of detail, but there are some specific things that I want that you can do on the SDX, like inward and outward offset lines, that you can't do on a CM machine. So I'm going to focus a little bit on those kind of things. So you can always watch the SDX one back to find out, that kind of thing about Canvas, but I want to make this one a little bit different. But there are two versions of Canvas Workspace, and Canvas Workspace is a free design area from Brother that contains lots of projects, and that you can design your own, and you can take the creativity of, for example, what we bring you on a USB to a different level. I don't know if any of you watched the Digital Craftorium shows at the weekend, but we took a USB that had 30 label shapes and 30 patterns and decoupage sheets, and I showed you loads of ways of manipulating those patterns, and it was done in Canvas Workspace. I filmed 2.5 hours worth of education. So if we're ever doing something like that, where we bring you a USB where it's not just what it seems, there's more to it, we're always going to film education, and we're going to film it before we go to air, so before we go on TV, so that while you're waiting for your product to arrive, or even if you decide not to order it, you can watch that education and learn something, because that's what we're all about. Because I want everybody that's ever bought a ScanNCut to get it out of the box. And I know that's a big ask, but we're getting there, which is good. At least by doing these free classes every month, we're getting more people involved, which is fabulous, because it's almost like, for me, you've done the difficult part in affording to buy one. Now we want to get you to use it. So I'm going to take you a basic overview of Canvas Workspace, and then I'm going to show you a couple of things that you might like to know. So this is what it looks like when you open it up. So there's two versions, as I was saying. There's one that you can download to your PC, so it goes onto your computer. And there's one that you can use on the internet, and they look different. So the one that you download to your PC is very much like you would expect in a graphics program, with like the band across the top that says File, Edit, View, all that kind of thing, and then the drop-down menus. The way that I found it easier to learn was to learn on a PC, but using the web app version, because it looks different. And what I love about the web app version is when you when I'm saying a web app version, I'm not using it on a tablet or a phone, although you can. I'm using the web app version on my PC, but it's not downloaded. And the reason is because when you hover over an icon, it tells you what it is. And for me, that's much easier, because I have the memory of I just don't have a very good memory at all. And I'll do something, and then when I come back to do it again, I'll be like, how did I do that? And I can't remember. So having the icons hover over, for me, when I was starting out, was much easier. Now I know what they are, because I use it all the time. But to learn with, it's always good to have that guide, I think. So you can, if you search, Google, whatever you use, Brother Canvas Workspace web app version, it won't ask you if you want to download it. If it does ask you if you want to download it, then it's asking you if you want to download the PC version. So you can either say no, and it will continue with the web app version, or you can download it. I do have the one downloaded on my laptop, but I tend to use this one because I find it's quicker, because I know where everything is now. I'm sure if I spent a couple of days on the the downloadable one, I'd know where everything is, but I haven't got a couple of days. I haven't got time to breathe at the moment, let alone do that. Right, so let's go to the top of Canvas Workspace. This is what it looks like. This is where your account is. So your account is free. They just ask you for a username and a password. And when you click on into here, you've got account settings. So your user information you can change. So if you wanted to change your password or your username, you can do that there. Your machine registration. So in your ScanNCut, let me just see if I can find out what page it's on a CM machine for you. Let me just have a look. There will be a page that has a unique number to you on there. Let me just see if I can find it for you, then I can tell you which page it's on. Where am I here? Settings. I have to flip from one machine to the next and then I get stuck. So on page 5 out of 6, you will have your unique number to your ScanNCut, and it will also tell you which version it's running on. So if there's an update available, if you go to Brother Solution Centre UK, you can see if your version is the most current version. But you will then type in the long number into Canvas Workspace. If I go into here, you can see I've got 4 machines registered. I know, right? 4 machines. You can delete one of these off at any time if you change it. So if you decide to upgrade to an SDX at any point, you can do that. You can have up to 4 on. And if I'm going between the studio and here and home and wherever else I am and I'm changing machines, I can delete one off, type another one in, and it will accept that. And then I can go back to the original one after. So that's what you do. It's got nothing to do with registering your machine for your warranty or anything like that. It's just to do with linking your ScanNCut to Canvas Workspace. And that's only if you've got a Wi-Fi enabled machine, okay? If you haven't got a Wi-Fi enabled machine, you can still use Canvas Workspace. You will just send files in. Instead of sending them into the cloud and recalling them in Canvas, you'll use a USB stick, which is what I'm doing tonight. So it's super easy. It doesn't matter if you've got the CM600 that isn't Wi-Fi, and if you've got the very first machine, you can still do everything that everybody else is doing. You just need to do it a little bit differently. And that's why I love it, because I would have been really cross. Well, I probably would have walked away from demonstrating it if they'd said, right now, no, we're not doing anything else, because that would have really annoyed me. Right, so the next thing you will see is when you open up Canvas Workspace is you've got all this, and this is called Canvas Project. So you've got all of these different projects here that Brother upload for you, and they'll add more on quite a regular basis, I have to say. There are hundreds of them, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. There's some for quilters, there's some for kids, there's some for photos, booths, there's all sorts of different things. Now, you might look at some of these and go, well, yeah, they're nice, but they're a little bit naive. But have a look at the files anyway, because they're all free. So you've got this whole resource here that's free. So for example, this invitation card here, I might not make that because to me that's quite simple, but I've got a fabulous doily there. So this is your cutting file for the card. This is your knife and fork. So you might want to use that. You've got a scallop square, which you've got in the machine anyway. But then you've also got this fabulous doily. So so when you click over part of it here, it tells you this is part A, B, C, and D. You get a video. So you'll click play, it'll take you onto YouTube and show you how to put it together. You then get a step-by-step recipe, so step-by-step instructions. And then you get an option to download all the parts. And it says unzip the zip file before transferring the data to your machine. So unzipping is just like getting a packet of dies, opening the packet and taking the die out. You're opening up that folder so that that file can be accessed. And if you've ever got a zip file, if you download it, you'll see it in downloads. It has a little folder with a zip on it. If you right click on that file, it will give you an option to extract. And then if you hover over extract, it'll usually give you a place to send to. So if I'm doing it, it'll say extract, and then I'll go to extract and it'll say send to, and I send it straight to the USB. And that's just enabling you to use that file. That's what it's doing. It's a zipped file. You have to unzip it. So that's that little bit. But if I then hover over this doily, for example, I can either download it straight away, or I can get it to put it on a mat. So the selected parts will be imported into the edit screen as a new design. When it is saved, it will be saved in My Projects on your account. So let's say OK and see what happens. So now look, you've got this doily design. Now this is free. So why would you not want to use it? I don't know if you can then manipulate it and edit it. You might be able to so we'll come to that bit later on, but you've got a doily that you can resize, you can scale. So it might be that the whole project doesn't interest you, but there are parts of the project that do, and that's where you can get all your cutting files from. And it's free. So it's like going to the library, basically, and getting out a book. You can go and do that with your cutting files. So I actually really like it for that. And I don't use them very often. If I'm ever stuck for a file and it's too long for me to make my own by welding different shapes, then, I'll have a play around in there. Right, so once we've done that, I'm just going to go and just going to do this a minute. Right, so this is what, just come back out of there again, and then I can take you back to here. Okay, so you've got all these different ones. Then you've got My Projects. Now, your projects is where they're not my projects, they're your projects, if you like. So when I click on here, these are all the projects that I've saved over the years, and I have thousands of them because I'm a little bit obsessed with saving stuff because you never know when you might need it, right? And I'm not the same with stuff at home. I can quite easily fill a skip if I need to. But with this, I'm like, well, I never know when I might need that file again, so I'm going to keep it. And because it's cloud-based, it's like an endless storage system, so you're not going to run out. So I might think eventually, right, you know what, I need that holly again, and I need to work out how I did this and how I did that. So every time I design something, I will save it in Canvas Workspace, because like I say, you never know when you're going to need it. And as soon as I delete it, I'll need it. So I'm one of those that's quite wary about that, because I've done it before and then had to redesign something all over again. If you ever want to delete things, so when you're working in Canvas Workspace, you have a bin option. So once you're finished, you can put it in the bin. If you ever want to delete it permanently out of your projects, you will do it here before you go into the home screen, and you'll have a little cross here. So it says, when you hover over, it says this project will be deleted. So to delete it, I'm just going to press the cross and delete. So now that has completely disappeared forever. You can also transfer them onto a USB stick if that's what you want to do, and you can also download them directly to your machine or to your computer. So if you're working on a non-Wi-Fi enabled machine, it will probably automatically send it to your downloads folder, your downloads in your computer, and then you'll open up downloads and you'll see it. So that's My Projects. Then you've got Pattern Collection. So Brother do lots of different add-ons, if you like. So they do a calligraphy starter kit, they do a calligraphy font card that has the font and some sentiments in. They do a paper piercing design collection, they do a rhinestone design collection, a rotary auto blade, etc., etc. So these are cards that you can buy extra images on them. And if you're thinking, well, what's on them? If you hover over and you go to show all, it will bring up pictures of what those images are. Now, I have to say, it was quite funny. Way back when, I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. And I was in a meeting with Brother in Manchester. So there was me and Jeff, who was the MD at the time. And these guys have flown over from Japan. So I had the top bods from Japan. And they brought this up. We had a big screen, a big plasma in the room, and they brought these up. And I sat there and I went, oh, okay. And they like looked at me and I went, okay, let me show you what your machine can do. And I typed in tattered lace and all the designs came up and they went, oh, wow. I was like, yeah, your machine will cut those. And that's how the tattered lace USBs came to be. Because although Stephanie had said from the beginning, you can die cut one and scan it in, you still had to buy the die to be able to do it, which was kind of defeating the object, but it's what we had at the time. So then once I showed them those, they were like, oh, okay. So these for me are quite basic, but if it's something that you want to use, you want a frame or you want a key or you want a little bunny mask or a flamingo, have a look and see what they're on. But these are the ones that you buy, okay? So you decide whether that's something that you want to do or not. And then you've got Disney. So we know with Disney there are restrictions. The only thing you can do with the Disney designs is make them bigger or smaller and flip them. They are for personal use only, but if you're thinking, right, well, I fancy a Mickey Mouse one, you can go along and have a look and see what the imagery is on it. So you can have, it's a kind of a see what you're getting before you get it, if you like, because they're just like a little credit card with a code in that activates it. So you don't really get to see what's on them, whereas this enables you to. So you've got that as well. So then if we come out of there, we now go into new. So this is where we're going to start going into a new project. So you click on new and this opens up Canvas Workspace. So down the left hand side, you've got my projects. So that's what we've just looked at. You've got your basic shapes, which are the basic shapes that are pre-installed into your machine's memory. You've got borders, which are the ones that are inside your machine. You've got logos, which are your welded words and phrases. You've got text, which are your fonts, and there are some extra fonts in here as well. So if you're working on a CM machine that's only got the 6 or 7 fonts, there are extra ones in here that are free of charge as well, so it's worth looking at those. This is if you've got your rhinestone starter kit. So I had the rhinestone starter kit, the stamping, the line embossing, the region embossing and the foiling. They're all added extras that I have had as, what do they call them? Like add-ons, if you like. So they won't appear in yours unless you own those. But if we have a look at the top here now, you've got project title. So this is really quite good. So if you've designed something on your ScanNCut, so let's say you designed the stepper card that we did in class 6, you could then take that into Canvas Workspace and you could title it stepper card and then download it again. So every time it came up then it would be called the stepper card, so you know which file is which. I tend to do it if I'm working on a big project. So if I'm doing something like made from the memory, I'll send it in and I'll go house front or house roof or whatever it is, and then send it back so I know which is which. So that's quite useful if you want to do that. You've got a new project here, so you can create a new project without coming out of Canvas. You've got overwriting a project. So if you're doing so for example, and you'll find this on your machine, if you brought the stepper card that we did and you've got it on your screen, or you've got it on your USB or saved into your machine's memory, and you bring it up on your screen and you add an aperture to the center of that stepper, when you come to save it, again, it will ask if you want to save it, if you want to overwrite it. So do you want to overwrite the original and save the one with the heart in instead? Or do you want to save it as a new project, so a second project? So if you want, I would save it as a new project. So I've got the original stepper and I've got the stepper with the heart in the middle of it. That's what overwrite this project means. So it's just, you've got an option to, instead of saving the original, changing it and then saving it. You've got image tracing in there, which I'm going to come back to at a later date. You've got SVG. Now this is important. In fact, we're going to do image tracing at some point, either next month or the month after, because it's an interesting one. I find it quite complicated, and we'll go into more detail of that when we do it in the class, because I can give you an option of how you can use that or how you can do things in a different way. But for now, I want to just do a little bit more on here because I want to show you some things that are specific really to CM users. This is where you would import a file. So if you've got something that is an SVG file and you want to import it. So for example, if you bought the digital Craftorium USB that launched on Friday, that was the weekender, and you haven't got a Wi-Fi enabled CM machine, so you've got the CM300 or the CM600, you will need to put your USB into your computer and import the file into Canvas Workspace. So to do that, you would go to SVG, so you click on that, then you would go straight to choose file, and that will open up your computer. So for example, I can do Card Maker's Compendium Volume 1. I could open up the patterns. It will then open the patterns for me. So let me just do that again for you because I did that a bit quick. So SVG, choose file. Down here, this is your PC. So I'm on the USB drive because that's where my files are. Then I'm going to choose Card Maker's Compendium because that was the name of the USB. So I'm clicking on that. So yours would just be Card Maker's Compendium. It's just because I've got loads of stuff on USBs. And then I'm going to go into the patterns within that and I'm going to choose number 5. Okay. So once I've got number 5 there and it says 05 SVG, all I do is press OK. And now there's that pattern. If you're doing it wirelessly, if you've got a CM700 or a 900, you'll just save it into the cloud and it will appear in your projects. But if you haven't, this is how you'll do it. Okay, so that's your SVG. So we'll get rid of that for now. These I'm going to talk to you about at a later date because these are freehand paths. So this is if you want to draw things yourself. I'm not there yet, so I can't teach you anything about that. If you want to know more about that, I'm sure if you go on YouTube and type in drawing in Canvas Workspace, if you're there already, there will be thousands of tutorials on that. But for me, it's not something that I necessarily want to do at this moment in time. I've got a brain that can break down something into shapes. So I can do it with shapes that are already in the machine's memory. So I haven't needed to use it. But I'm sure at some point I will investigate it further when I manage to get time to do it, which definitely is not at the moment. This button here will become your best friend. And it's called Undo, and it's my best friend. I just wish there was one for cake and chocolate and things like that, chips. Because I would love to be able to eat that and then just undo button, but it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So you've got undo and you've got redo. Now, even if you have welded something together, you can undo it and you can go back as many spaces as you need to. Once you've saved something as a new project, you can't then go in and undo that because you've saved it. So you've finalised that project. But at any point in between starting it and finalising it, you can undo it. So that's a really, really good button when you're learning. I still use it a lot now. The other day on air, I was like, right, so we do this. And then I went, oh, what I should have done is duplicated the basic shape. So I just undid it, duplicated it, and then redid it. So it's a really good one. It's the same on Micro Studio. I love the undo. It just takes away, for me, personally, it takes away that fear of getting it wrong because it doesn't matter because I can just press a button and it'll put it right again. And I love that. If I was designing something and it had taken me 3 hours and there wasn't an undo button, I'd be really worried all the way through that 3 hours that I'd do something and mess up the whole thing. So I would be constantly saving stuff then. But that button is brilliant. So then we've also got a bin, which is relevant when you've got shapes on. And then you've got the properties. So I'm going to bring on a basic shape. So let's just choose a circle for now. So just click on that and you get your circle. If we go into the properties down here, you'll see that this is your height. So your first box is always your height. Now, for me, this doesn't make any sense. This drives me crazy. And I'm sure it does if you're into design work and all that sort of stuff. But what I want is a vertical arrow for the height and a horizontal arrow for the width, because that makes sense in my head. So the way that I have to think about it is a bit quirky, hence Quirky Bird. The first box is the height, and the second box is the width, and H comes before W in the alphabet. So I always know that the height is first and the width is second. I know, crazy, that's how my brain works. Somebody gives me a number, I have to make up something that makes that number make sense. It's just the way that my brain works. I don't have pictures, so it compensates and does stuff in other ways. Yeah, my husband would just call me weird, which I can't really argue with, to be fair. You've got maintain aspect ratio. So we're used to aspect ratio from our ScanNCut. It means you can untick that box and then you can make the height independent from the width. That's what it means. So if you want to be really specific with it, if you want to change a shape and make it really specific, you can do. And then just to put it back on, you just tick it again. You've got rotation here. So instead of using this and having, you know, doing it by eye and that'll do kind of thing, you can move your shapes and rotate them as a degree increment. So that's useful. The colour is if you're going to do lots of layers of a design. So if you're designing something and you want lots of different layers, you can add colour to those different layers. It doesn't keep the colour when you download it, but while you're working on it, it might help. And then this is one of the best things ever for me. I love this. And I actually didn't do this in the SDX class. So you could watch the SDX and learn something else. This is line type. So right now, and its default, it's set as a cutting or a drawing line. So a cutting and drawing. So if I send that down to the machine and ask it to cut, it'll cut it. If I send it to the machine and ask it to draw, it'll draw it. Okay. And that's just how it works. So you've got options. It will do both. If you're doing something like a faux stitch line, which I'm going to show you now. So first thing I'm going to do that is come out of here. And I'm going to go to edit at the top. And I'm going a little bit ahead of where I was going to go, but this is important. I want to create what they call an inward offset line. So an outward offset line would be, if you had your circle, your first outward offset line would be your matte layer. And then your second one would be your second matte layer. Okay, so you would build it up like that. If you're creating an inward offset line, it's making the line smaller than the original shape. So if I go onto create offset line and I click on that and I create a 1 millimeter inward offset line, so it's pretty obvious. The spacing is your increment of measurement, so 1 millimeter. I want it to come inside the original circle and I want to leave the original as it is. Okay, so I'm going to leave as is. You've got an option to delete it and you've got an option to set it as a drawing line. So when I press OK now, you'll see I've got a double circle. If I just zoom in for you, and this is your zoom up here. If I zoom in, you'll see you've got 2 circles there now. And I'm just going to move that up so that you can see it. It will always keep the original selected. So if you want the one that's on the inside, the one that you've just created, you click in the middle. Okay, so you've now got 2 lines. So going back to the properties, I can then set a dash pattern for that. So it will then do little dashes all the way around the inside of that circle, either as a cut line or a drawing line, depending on what you set it as. So if you come down to the bottom here and dash pattern, if I click on this drop down, you've got lots of different options of dashes. And the one you've even got a straight line in there as well, which is great. I tend to use this one, which is the 4th one down, because it's a nice increment of measurement. And you can see now that I've got stitching. Now it would cut that if you wanted it to cut it. So right now, if I just come out of here, if I sent that down to the machine, it would cut the circle and it would cut the cut line, because they're both set as cutting or drawing lines. Or if I asked it to draw, it would draw both. So it would either cut both or it would draw both. But if I want it to draw the dash line with it selected, so you can see it's still selected because it's inside, I can set it as a drawing only line. And then I can go to my outside one. So I can come off it and go to my larger circle, and I can select that as a cutting only line. So when I then send that down to my machine and I ask it to draw it, the only line that will appear will be the dash one, because that's the only drawing line that's available to it. And then once it's drawn it, I can ask it to cut that file, and the only one that will appear on your screen is that solid circle, because that's the only one that's the cutting file. So it's a really cool way of doing faux stitching, this. And if you decide that that dash line being a millimetre inside is too far away from the outside line, because on the SDX you can do a millimetre, which is the minimum, and then you can do it in 1/4 millimetre increments. On the CM and in Canvas Workspace, you can only do it in 1 millimetre increments. So what you would do is go into Properties, and it's 98. So if you make that 98.5, so you're making it 1/2 mil bigger, and the aspect ratio is maintained, when I click off that, it moved that dash line slightly bigger, but it's now off center. So if you drag a box around both of those, so you're selecting both of them, and you can either go to Edit and select all, or you can just drag a box, which is quicker. We're going to use our alignment. Now, you'll know these symbols because they're the same ones that are on your machine. And I think when you're learning something new, if you have something that's familiar, it makes it easier. So for example, a few years ago, they asked me if I would do a show with distress crayons, and I'd never used them before, and it's a psychological thing, because I'd heard of pumice stone and rusty hinge, and I'd heard of the colours, it made it feel more familiar. So when you're learning in Canvas Workspace with the web app version, because a lot of the symbols you know from your machine, I think it makes it a little bit less scary. And I was adamant that I was never going anywhere near Canvas Workspace. What do I need that for? Because the reason I fell out of love with Cricut was because it got to the point where you had to buy digitally and you had to use it with a computer, and I didn't want to craft like that. So when the ScanNCut came out and it was completely standalone, that made me happy. So then I was like, well, no, I don't want to work on a computer. Honestly, you will love it. And just learn a little bit at a time. That would be my best advice. Don't sit there for days and overwhelm yourself. Just do a little bit. If you're computer savvy, you'll get it straight away. But for me, it's been a journey, and I have loved it, I have to say. So I've selected both the circle and the dash line. So I'm going to align it centrally vertically, and I'm going to align it centrally horizontally. So now I've got my cut line, but my draw circle line, my draw dash line, I'll zoom in for you, is closer to the edge than it was before. So you can see now it's right up against that line, which is where I would say put a faux stitch line, because it almost becomes a mat and layer line because you're going around with the pen. And it's funny because when I used to do retreats with the Cricut, and then a couple with the ScanNCut, I used to have 35 ladies in a room, and they'd all toddle off to bed at night, and they'd take all the stuff in the app because I made them do all the faux stitching around all the pieces. Now you can do it in here, which is brilliant. So that's one thing that I wanted to show you. So we can get rid of that. We can just put that, and you can save that then. So if you wanted to save that, you would go to, oh, where's my thing gone at the top? That's because this has popped up. Bear with me a minute while I just go back to here, because I've zoomed in. Where am I? There. Right, what was I saying? Oh, if you want to save it. Sorry, my brain is really tired after this weekend. So if you want to save it, you go to Project and you press the plus. And as you press it, it comes up and it says Save as another project. So you click that and it saves it. So now, if I go back here and I go to My Projects, I'll just get rid of that. There is that file. So it's now saved it, and you can recall that at any time. So if you want a faux stitch circle, You can drag a box around both of them, go to edit and group. We're used to group, and then you can resize that. So you could now save that. You could type in here, stitched circle. And then when you downloaded that or saved it, in your projects, it would have that title. So it's a really good way of doing it. So for example, the stepper card that we did in class 6, you could send that into Canvas Workspace, name it, send to stepper card, and then you've got it and you know exactly where it is and what file it is. So sometimes it's worth just spending a couple of hours going in and naming your files, especially if you've done quite a bit of work with them and you know that you're going to want to use them again. So let's say you've made an aperture card, which we did in one of the classes, and you want to save that, title it, and then you know what it is and where it is. Okay. Right. So let's get rid of this, because there's something else that I want to show you, and I'm going to do this specific to the CM users because it's different on an SDX. So I'm talking about mats and layers for letters now, because I remember the first set of dies that I bought. It was a set of Sizzix dies. It was the steel rule dies, so the ones in the bed of foam. And it cost me £136 for the uppercase alphabet and £136 for the mat layers for that to sit on top of. Granted, that was a long time ago. That was probably, gosh, 2003. Gosh, that makes me feel old. That's 20 years ago. It's probably 20 years ago. Maybe a little bit less than that. But it cost me a fortune. But I bought it because I was teaching scrapbooking classes and I wanted something to be able to do titles with. And when you said the A, for example, so anything that's got a landlocked area, the A, if you imagine what a letter A looks like, you then want the triangle and the triangle in the middle. You want the outside of the A to be bigger for the mat layer, but you want the inside of the triangle to be smaller so you see it, if that makes sense. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do that on a CM machine. On an SDX, if you bring on any of the fonts that are inside the machine's memory and you ask it to do an outward offset line, so say you do a 1mm outward offset line, it automatically makes that landlocked area a 1mm inward offset line. It does it automatically. However, on a CM machine, you can't do that. And what happens with the CM machine is that when you well, let me show you. It's easy to show you. If I go into my text here and I click on this font, this appears on my screen. So I double click and that allows me to backspace this. So if I bring on a capital letter A and click on that, if I try to now ungroup that so I can make it bigger, if I create an outward offset line of that, so go to edit, create an offset line, and I do 1mm outward and leave the original as it is, it's given me that, but look what it's done to the middle. It's got rid of it, it's ignored it, because it can't do it. So what you do is, because I will not be beaten, you know, I'm like a dog with a bone, but I tell you, stubborn should be my middle name, especially if I'm trying to work something out and I'm trying to help somebody. I will go to the ends of the earth. Right, so the way to do it is to bring on the letter A onto your CM machine and either send it wirelessly or import it as a file. So on the USB that's in the computer right now, I've saved the letter A. So I'm going to go to SVG. I'm going to choose the file. I'm going to go to my USB drive because it's on there. And I know, because I saved it just before we started, that it's file number 55. Now you'll see it says FCM. That is ScanNCut's own file format. When the ScanNCut first came out, it was meant to be for fabric crafters. That's why it's called FCM, Fabric Cutting Machine. But the blades weren't good enough for fabric, and the fabric crafters rejected it, and the paper crafters picked it up, thank goodness. And then they adjusted everything, and now it cuts fabric like a dream. But that's what FCM means, if you're ever wondering. So even if you import it as an SVG file, it will export it as an FCM file, because it can read SVG files, but it exports it as its own file format. So number 55. So if I click on that and press OK, I've now got that letter A. It's the same one that I had before, it's just smaller. Now, by sending it from your machine into Canvas Workspace, whichever route you choose to do, it means that when you go to edit, you can ungroup it. Now you can't ungroup it when you've got it in Canvas, just from Canvas itself, but when you send it in, it allows you to ungroup it. So what that then means is, so I'm just going to duplicate that. So I'm going to go to edit, and at the top you've got cut, copy and paste, and then you've got duplicate. So I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to move that one over there. So now I'm working with this one. So let's go to edit, and yeah, that's fine. So because I moved it to make sure that it was still ungrouped. I can just undo when it does that. So this is going to be my original letter. All right, so I'm going to group that one together again. So edit and group. The one thing I wish they'd do is when you go to edit, they'd leave that drop down there until you close it. I'm going to have a word. I'll get asked why probably about 300 times from Japan. And then they'll go, oh, okay. I have a very funny story about that. I'll tell you when I've done this. So I've got my letter A and it's ungrouped. So I want to make an outward offset line of this. So I go to edit and I go to offset line. Okay, so whenever you hover over, if you're thinking which is offset, just hover over them and it will tell you. That makes your life a whole lot easier. So create offset. Let's do a 2mm outward offset line. I'm going to delete the original because I've duplicated it. So I've got my letter already, so I can delete it and press OK. So I've now got a bigger outline. So it's created that offset line. So when people come and ask me at shows, do I need to upgrade to an SDX? The answer is no, you don't need to. There is nothing that you can do on an SDX that you can't do with a CM machine and Canvas Workspace that I've found so far as working with files, adjusting things, etc., etc. There are some accessories that can't work with it because the piercing mat is too thick and it hits the scanner unit at the back because you can't lift the back rollers. But function-wise, I haven't found anything yet. You might want to upgrade, but you don't need to. So now, if I try and get to this triangle here, it won't let me because the ScanNCut sees this outside shape sat on top of that triangle. It doesn't see it as an aperture, it sees it as a shape. So we go to edit, and within edit, there is this order, and you're going to send it to the back. So you've got bring to the front, bring forward. So bring to the front, it brings it right to the front. If you've got 3 layers and you press bring forward, it will bring it forward by 1 layer. Then you've got send backward, so it would send it backwards by 1 layer, or send to the back. So we're going to send it right to the back. So now when I click on that triangle, I can get to it. So we created a 2mm outward offset line of the outside of the letter. So we're going to create a 2mm inward offset line of the triangle. So inward this time, I'm going to delete the original. So now I've got this. So now all we do is group that together. So go to edit and group. And now I can align both of those. So let's do it properly. Drag a box around both of them. Go to edit and align it centrally vertically because I want it in the middle. And then I want it in the middle horizontally. So now I've got my matte layer. So that 272 pounds that I spent on that one alphabet, I've now done in Canvas Workspace, even though I've imported the file from a CM machine. And that's why I love Canvas, because it's not about doing lots of fancy things. It's about being able to do more creative things with what we've already got. So like USBs, where we keep the pattern and we can get to the pattern. So I know I've explained this a lot in shows, but I don't know whether you all watch Create and Craft or not. So if we've got a pattern, I'm just going to keep that for a minute because I want to show you something else. But if I just go into my USB again and bring in that pattern that we had before. So let me scroll down and find Card Maker's Compendium, Patterns, number 5. It doesn't matter which one it is. So when I bring this into Canvas, when a graphic designer designs that, they work on something like Illustrator and they draw all the shapes. And then there's a button that they can press. So when they're drawing it, it's a square and they're working within that square. So they've got the square as one shape, and then all the detail that creates that pattern is all of the shapes, and it's sat on top of the square because they're designing it. So it's layers basically. So the square is the bottom layer and the pattern is the top layer. There's a button then that they can press in their graphics program that compounds it. And what compounding means is it makes it one piece. So it then sees it the way that we see it. It becomes a stencil basically. That's how it sees it. What I ask the graphic designers to do when they're designing our files is to leave it so that it's a square with the shape sat on top. And the reason for that is if it's compounded by a graphic designer, it doesn't matter how you import it into Canvas Workspace, whether you send it via the cloud or whether you import it from a USB, because it's only one shape, it can't ungroup it because it's one shape. So there's nothing to ungroup. Whereas the way that we save our files, there's lots to ungroup. So for example, if I move the square and click on this pattern, they're all separate pieces. So I could just have that piece, or I could just have that piece, or I could just have that piece, or I could take part of the pattern. So I could get rid of, let's have a look. Let's get rid of all that lot and put that in the bin. And let's get rid of that and that. And that. Nope, where are we? There we are. So now I've got another pattern. So I can then group that together. Go to Edit and Group. I can then duplicate that. So go to Edit and Duplicate. I can then go into the properties of that and rotate it. So I want it upside down. So I just type in 180 and press the cross and it rotates it. And now I've got a border at the top and the bottom of my card. And that will cut into the cardstock. So by not compounding the patterns, it gives you much more scope. And I love that, because for me, when you're buying a pattern like that, the creative bit is inside. It's not the square, it's the bit that's inside. And if you can get to the bit that's inside and make the most of it, then why would you not? Now, if I just undo all that, I'll show you what compounding is, because you can do it in Canvas Workspace. It's not called compounding, it's called dividing. Look at this, how it puts it all back together. Isn't that brilliant? So if I drag a box around this now, you'll see it's picked up all those individual pieces and the square. If you go to Edit and go down to Process Overlap and watch the SDX class back, because I show them exactly what all those are. So I'm kind of trying to do two different things in these, even though it's the same class, so that you can get information from both. If I go to Process Overlap and Divide, what Divide does, in my head, it's a digital punch, and it comes down and it takes all those pieces that are sat on top of that square and it punches them through. So it compounds it. It's the same thing. It's exactly what it would do. So when I move this, I've got that shape and I go to edit and there's no ungroup available because it's one shape. And there's no group available because it's one shape. So it's done that compounding. But these are still all individual. So now I can cut that into my cardstock. I can use that one to cut out of my cardstock. I can put that in the middle of a sheet of Mylar and make my own stencil. I can do what we did before. So I could have just the flower in the middle. I could have just the corner. I could have this part and create a border. And I can be really, really creative with that shape just by dragging and deleting bits off, etc., etc. So that's why our files Cricut doesn't like very much. So Cricut needs a compound path design because when it imports it, otherwise what it does is it splits it into layers. So if I imported this into Cricut, it would put the square there and then it would take all these shapes in a random order and put them all in lines. So Cricut needs a compound path. Canvas doesn't. You can either use it with that or you can make your own. So our patterns will always be uncompounded, for the sake of a better word, because there's more creativity in it. So that's another thing that you can do in Canvas. Now, having said all that, I'm going back to my, actually, let me just show you. Now, let me show you with the letter. Sorry, I'm having an argument with myself in my head now. Right, so I've got my original letter A and I've got this letter A. If I try now, so let's say we wanted to make the beginnings of a word book. So if I went back and went into my basic shapes and I brought on a square. So let's bring on a square. And I'm going to stretch that to the size of the A. So I'm just going to stretch that up like that. Right, so I now want to weld that letter to that rectangle, okay? Because I'm creating a word book and the first word is A. So I would do this more precisely because I would make sure that the height was the same, but just roughly. So I want to weld that A to that rectangle. So I drag a box across here and I go up to edit and I go down to process overlap and I hover over here and that says weld. If I weld it now, it welds it, but it takes the middle out of the A because we haven't compounded it, we haven't divided it. So that triangle is the only part that isn't overlapped. And when you're welding, every part has to overlap, but that didn't. So if we undo it and go back to where we were, and I move this out of the way, if I now drag a box around that and I go to edit, and it's grouped, remember, because I grouped it, so I can ungroup it, but I can also divide it. So if I divide it, now what it's done is it's punched that triangle through that letter A. So now when I bring this in and I weld this, I go to edit and I weld. It welds it and it keeps the letter A because the letter A is one shape and the rectangle is one shape, and therefore they're both overlapping. So it's that, for me, alone, is worth learning Canvas Workspace, because to be able to take something like a pattern and divide it so that it's then one piece and then weld something else onto it is invaluable. So if you've got, for example, the pattern, so let's say, for example, let me go into here and import, choose file. I want that one again. Okay. Flashes at me when I do something wrong. I'm like, yes, okay. Oh, come on, choose file. Let's choose 5 again and press OK. Oh, stop, because I'm doing it too quickly. So choose file, number 5. There we go. Okay, right. So I've got this. And I go to edit, and I group it, and I make it smaller, like that. And then I bring on a square, and I want to weld this square to this to make it into a shape card. So let's make this the same size as the square. So we go to 100. The aspect ratio is ticked, so it will automatically make the width the same. So if I now go to here, and I want this to be my card front, so drag across there, go to edit and align it to the top, so they're level. If I now weld those two together, so this will be my card front, this is the back of my card, and I'll have a beautiful image on the front. If I go to edit and weld, I'm just left with the two squares because that pattern isn't overlapped. Right, so if I undo it and I take that away and I divide that first, so I make it into one piece, and I move that out the way and I get rid of that. Just a note, if you're doing this and you're sending it backwards and forwards to ScanNCut, every time you import it, you'll need to divide it again because it then sees it as a new file. So if I'm just going to use my arrows on my keyboard. So if I drag a box around there, go to edit and align it to the top of the bottom, and now I weld it, I've now got my card shape. So for me personally, and I think for probably a lot of you guys at home as well, that is invaluable because now all those patterns can become the front of a card. And if, see, this is when my brain starts going. So if now let's go back, let's get rid of that and go back to the original file. So I could, let me have a look, where am I here? SVG file. Bring that file in again. If I think about this. Yes, so if I take the square and I stretch it, sorry, I had to think about that then. So I make it twice as wide, and I would do that by going into the properties and doing it specifically. I can now just stretch that square. See, this is something else I've just thought of that I've never thought of before. This is what happens when you go into Canvas Workspace. It's like going down a rabbit hole, I'm just warning you. So get yourself coffee. You might want a flask of coffee because you're not going to be getting off that chair once you're in it. And chocolate, and I mean like a bar. Don't add a piece because you won't be getting up to the fridge either. If I now drag that there and go to edit and divide, I don't even need to weld because I've stretched it. It's just brilliant. And once you start, it is literally like going down a rabbit hole. You go down there and you're like, right, what does this do? What does this do? What does this do? And you can't break it. You've got an undo button. So if you press something that you didn't mean to press, doesn't matter. You can undo it. For things like process overlap. So if I bring on a circle, this is how I learned what it did. Okay, just play. So I went to edit and I was like, right, what does this do? So that's copy and paste. I get that. I'm used to that. What's this one? Duplicate. Okay, so I pressed it. Hey, presto, got a second circle. And it was literally like this. So I then went, right, so let me have a look back in edit. So edit and what's this one? Select all. What does that do? So I clicked on it, selected everything. That made sense. So then I was like, right, what does edit do? What does this do? And I just went through it all. So I came down to process overlap, and I know what weld does. It welds two together. All right, I know what that is. So undo. Then I selected both again, and I was like, right, what does the next one do? What does divide do? I don't know what that means. So I pressed the button, and I went, okay, so, oh, okay. So it split that. So wherever the overlap, it's split it, and it's divided, and it's come up with that shape in the middle. That's really cool, because if you're making a box design, for example, or a drawer, and you want that little notch out of it, if you bring in a square and you bring in it could be a scallop circle, doesn't really matter, and I want to make that smaller, and I move this over here, and I make sure that these little dots on the left and right here are level with the center. So I would align that then centrally vertically, so I know it's in the middle. If I then go to edit and divide it, I get half of that, which can be useful. I also get that half, and I also get my drawer front. Okay, so that's that one. Then remember, you can watch this back because I know I'm going quite quickly. So if I then bring on a circle again and I go to edit and duplicate it, let's see what the next one does. And this is all I did, and then my brain started going, oh right, so if I have two shapes, one overlapping the other, I can make another shape. And then if I add another one into that, I can do another one. And it just went from there. And now every time I use Scan, I'll just, instead of watching telly at night, I'll just sit with this on my knee and play. It's fabulous. So now if I go edit and remove overlapped, it removes the part that was overlapped. If I go back and I go back to a place where we've got two full circles and I select that, I go to edit and I subtract, it takes away everything once it subtracts everything from the original shape. So it's really cool. And this is where shapes really take on their own design, because you can weld things, you can subtract things, you can take part of a shape out of another shape, you can split a shape, like we did when we did the little drawer front. We split that circle into two. So there's so much you can do, but you're not wasting anything. All you're doing is gaining knowledge and gaining versatility with what we bring you on USBs or what you've already got in your machine. So I'm going to wind it up there because I know I've given you a lot of information there, and watch it back as many times as you need to and learn that bit. It'll be on Highlight Crafts YouTube channel tomorrow. At some point, Andrew's adding in as a caveat in case he doesn't do it first thing in the morning. But it will be there. It'll take it takes ages to upload. So it will be there and you can go back and watch time and time and time again. But the parts that I've shown you tonight are probably the bits that I use the most, because it enables me to be more creative and get more value out of each pattern that's on that USB. So because we had 30 nested shapes, 30 label shapes and 30 patterns, if we didn't have Canvas Workspace, we'd have 30 options. But because we have Canvas, we can put any pattern in any shape, which means you've then got 900 options. And that's why Canvas Workspace excites me, because if you think about that as dies, you could have 30 pattern dies and 30 shape dies, which is 60, or you work digitally in Canvas, you've got 900, because you can put any pattern in any shape. And that goes on to the next bit, the more complex bit. And if you're ready for the more complex bit and you want to watch that bit over again, for the Card Maker's Compendium USB that we launched on Friday, that was the weekender, which will be available either on Create and Craft now or on Highlight Crafts in the next few days, you've got so much more scope. And we filmed 2.5 hours worth of education. So it shows you how to do all the things that I did on TV. It's already filmed, so you can go and watch that for free as well. And that's why I love it, because there was no better feeling than I get on Friday when I'm driving down the A1 going, I've got something new to show them, I'm really excited. And if you use Minecraft Studio, that's a whole nother thing. Watch that again, because I show you how whatever you design in Minecraft Studio, you can make into a cutting file, scan it in, cut it out. So it just keeps giving, and this is 8 years into the journey. If this was in the first month, I'd be like, well, yeah, obviously, but we're 8 years in. Imagine what we're going to find in the next 8 years. It's going to be brilliant. So I'm going to love you and leave you for now. We have a code for you tonight, which is CM. So C for craft, M for master, craft master, 1212. It gives you 20% off all our 12 by 12 card stock. And if you did buy the USB this weekend, that's what I used on all the finished samples. So enjoy. It's valid till the 30th of April, so you've got plenty of time to spend it if you want to. And I will see you next month for the next instalment. And I've no idea what we're doing, but it'll be fun and it'll be very creative. Take care. Lots of love. Bye. If you want to see more from Highlight Crafts, make sure you click the like button. Subscribe by clicking the subscribe button below and click the bell icon to receive notifications of all our future content. You can also click here to see our latest video or click here to see more videos like this one.